Welcome. This week on Artist Trauma, we did Ionesco's Rhinoceros. So, Chris, what did you think of this object?
I thought it was fun. I thought it. I thought that it was the first play that we've done where the types of popular media that I'm reminded by are different from the other ones. This is more Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Robot Chicken, Eric Andre show. Um, and I think that why how it's successful is that when you have such a suspension and nonsense, you're not expecting moments to get deep. So when they do, they actually cut really well, and it's really well done.
Yeah, it's such an odd mixture of just an absolutely absurd premise of just the people of this town and apparently the rest of humanity are just turning into rhinoceroses volitional.
And they apparently have some agency over that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's the baffling thing.
How dare you critique their way of life, Ray?
How dare you? It's a free choice. Live and let live.
I would prefer to eat outside in the grass.
Perhaps only when we let down civilization we can be ourselves. Whatever.
It's like it's just
Yeah, but it's simultaneously like it's such a weird. I mean, it's almost like a zombie movie if everybody thought it was just vaguely inconvenient. Um,
yeah, because that's another thing. Instead of in zombie movies where they're dying and they know they're the stakes, the main character knows the stakes by the end, but they're like, well, I mean, we can go to work without the stairs. Like,
as in, upon learning that, they might have to fire one of his coworkers because he's a rhinoceros now, Botard says, "Well, you'll be hearing from the union on this. I'll be finding a representative." Um,
yeah. Well, I think so. It's funny the 60s generation turned it into a metaphor, and I traced the line for any nationalistic fascist groupthink. And that's fine. I don't think it exhausts the play though. I had some feelings that reminded me of like the early period, not the early period, but that period of COVID where everyone's trying to keep up appearances and it's not working really well. It was a little long, but like, before the vaccine, there was just this period of like, are we going to talk about it? No, I'm just going to go to write this paper. Like I can't talk about it.
I mean, what's interesting about it is like you like the way the characters are reacting to the situation of a rhinoceros running at full tilt down the street, or your coworker having been transformed into a rhinoceros. Apparently, there's 17 other confirmed cases throughout the city, and so on. The way they react to this is just so like complacent to a large degree, and it's just like, well, but the thing is, when you think about it, how else would you react to this situation? How else would you react to this absurdity? um
Yeah, because like the phenomena of seeing a rhinoceros run down the street is in my brain distinctly different from a man was turned into a rhinoceros. But then when you think about it, it's like it's so far beyond the possible that it's like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do with that. I guess it's possible or something. I
yeah,
don't.
let's go back to having this talk about self-improvement, John. um yeah.
Well, it's like the main character is a hilariously an alcoholic. Normally, it's not funny, but in this play, it's very funny. It's always like it's partially positioned as a sense of anxiety, as a signifier of the anxiety he has that keeps him from being a rhinoceros in a certain sense, was how I was reading part of it.
Well,
But he's like he's in the know. He's anxious. He's freaking out all the time.
Well, what it is the sense that I get is first off, I want to say the characterization in this play is really good, but also very odd in a certain way. As in, part of like the character of John, who we meet in the first act, the way he's just positioned as the stiff upper lip, pull yourself by your bootstraps, fulfill your duty to others, become a cultured man, and just
Oh yeah,
so
that's just straight rhinoceros talk right there. You're
yeah,
talking like a rhino.
yeah, it's so aggressive. And the way he's just from the first moment belligerently like criticizing his friend Berenger, it's just so
Yeah,
well sculpted. It's so well
yeah, very
sculpted.
well sculpted.
Um, but at the same, but the thing is, like all the characters are like that to one degree. Like Dudard is the very thoughtful, scientific, rationalistic man.
Oh my God, he was my dad. And again, like this is during this period of the and me. I mean, there was one period of COVID where I was like, I'm sure it won't last more than 2 months. Everything's gonna be fine. Everybody get chipper. Let's go. And I was like, oh my God, for a brief week, I was Dudar. you know,
or
like, yeah, like the event of the rhinoceros doesn't track into regular life, but it metaphorically leaves open this sense of event, whether it's a group speak event or there's a lot it's so well done when you get a group of people together who have to go through some absurd stupid event, some ridiculous thing.
and Botard is just the quintessential sort of conspiratorially minded person who's always feeling like society has something against me. And I have to say, like
Yeah.
his description
Hmm.
had just the most cutting remark I've ever seen in description of a person in a play. It says, Botard, former school teacher. Short, he has a proud air, wears a little white mustache, a brisk 60-year-old. And then, in brackets, he knows everything, understands everything, judges everything. What a vicious bit of sarcasm right there. And it's completely right. Um,
He knows, he's got the answer. He hasn't figured out yet the origin of the rhinos, but he'll get back to you on that.
but getting back to like the contrast with like Berenger is someone who's just doesn't fit in with society. He doesn't,
Hmm.
he isn't pulling himself together. He can't deal with others on a certain level. I think he's someone who's, and he's trying to be more sincere about things, and he's the one who's calling out John of, what are you talking about? You couldn't have told whether this was whether there was one or two horns on the rhinoceros. uh,
And then it was
you
the
don't know
only
it's Asiatic or African. And how
that
much fucking time was on Asiatic versus African rhinoceros? That's beautiful.
when every word the logician says is home for me, where it's just like your dog is actually a cat, and I'm just like, okay. And it doesn't, it serves a certain purpose, but not really. It's kind of just like some of the play. There's some moments which I think are really effective where he's like, we're just gonna have some fun,
Yeah, it's
you know.
there's a lot of just straight fun, but I feel it holds together in that I feel the real absurdity almost is you have these different people with their, to use existentialist language, have this sort of insincere, to some extent bad faith attitude towards reality. Some of it's more sympathetic and some of it's less sympathetic, like John and
Mhm.
um Botard are just repulsive beings, but like
Well, and a lot of second-handedness.
yeah, and Dudard and Papillon are somewhat nicer about it,
Hmm.
but it's like they're not dealing with reality. They're not actually dealing with things. They have their own little absurd system, and I feel like that's best crystallized by the logician. who is
Yeah.
just coming up with these absolute garbage syllogisms. Um, you know, like uh, like Socrates. When
Oh
he
my, oh
was,
yeah.
I mean, it was too much.
Socrates, also a cat. Yes, that's true. I have a cat named Socrates. No, shut up. This isn't how.
Now, now, if you, now if there are four paws to each cat, and you have two cats, how many would each cat have if you took away two? And like, well, one possibility is one cat has six paws and the other has none.
It's very uh like it's like the flip side of Johnny Depp speaking. It's like an honest man, whereas when Johnny Depp speaks, it's actually going somewhere, but still has that flip side. Here, it's not really going anywhere, and we're just kind of turning around. Um, and it's funny. But yeah, I think it's actually your mention of the logician as being sort of God, I want to use even more specific language. The logician is the button that holds the sofa of the play together. Like the way he talks is logical but wrong but crazy. Everything is in the logician in this
Yeah,
play.
no, I think he's the character, sort of the par excellence bad faith.
He
He's
doesn't have a name.
Yeah, he doesn't even have a name. He's a logician. Um, and there's a sense of he the only character who's kind of dealing with reality is, and like just the sheer absurdity of the situation is Berenger.
Yes.
And he's, the last one to become, well, he doesn't become a rhino unlike the rest of humanity. Um,
No, he snaps. There's a great last in the last paragraph, a final snapping out of it, which was beautiful.
well, it's so odd. We'll get back to that. I want to get back
Yeah.
to that, but
Well, I
but
want to talk a little bit more about the logician. I think that, I mean, I just did one read. I would have to read this a bunch of times to decide this, but I think one reading you could take of the logician is that he represents how weird it is when society speaks. On the one hand, it's trying to give the law, so logic, like a law of logic, and yet so often what mass communication, what the people say is crazy. And there's a sense that like you're supposed to follow what social expectations are. And
yeah,
when you treat it as a law, I think it really highlights that it's just arbitrary or it's just whatever, it's not always actually logical.
yeah. And I would put it in the way of to use your Lacanian language. You have the real of people turning into rhinoceroses. This is
Yes.
something utterly bizarre, and I mean, how do you even process that? You can't process it. It's just what?
Yeah.
Um, and then you have all of these other ways in which we put the imaginary and the symbolic are placed on top of that in an attempt to hide that away.
Like in the symbolic register, trying to go to work, to use the language of work to keep up your role appearances. And then in the imaginary way, the way people cling to their identity in the play.
Yeah, or the way that like Botard, he's just frankly denying it.
Right.
When other characters telling him, no, like there's like 17 witnesses of that this happened, and oh yes, Daisy over here and Berenger are two witnesses also, and he keeps going back to the conspiratorial language of like, no, you're just trying to, you're in league with each other. And I loved,
Right.
I absolutely loved he basically the last line that's reported from him from Daisy is after Berenger no Botard has become a rhinoceros.
Yeah.
Asked, did he give any reasons? Daisy says what he said was, We must move with the times. Those were his last human words.
We must move with the time.
We must move with the times. There's, as in, it's such an insincere kind of statement. It's just the sort of the raw bullshit of, oh well, that's what everyone else is doing.
I got it. I don't know. It was everyone was doing it. I mean, I think I'm gonna make one of those giant statements and then hedge it a little bit. So after World War II, there's so much thought about individuality. Like, how does one resist fascism? How does one retain their individuality in this technological world? And I think that Ionesco and Pinter have a similar message for us. And I think that message is similar to Pinter's "Don't let them tell you what to do." There's a real reckoning existentially with the individual in a way that is just different from other plays. I mean, it's just
Yeah, no,
so
no,
important. Like,
I
what
think
is your individual responsibility and substance, even?
yeah, it's. I would agree with big aspects of that. Like in a sense, in the birthday party, the standout character in my mind is always Goldberg because of just that aggressive pompousness and
Yeah.
insincerity that marks every one of his words. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And in a sense, like Botard and Dudard and Papillon and Jean all have a degree of that. It isn't quite as delicious as it is with Goldberg, because nothing is
No.
that delicious. Um, but it's one. There is that way of that sort of insincerity hiding the true experience, the true feelings.
And
And
also, isn't there instead an idea of individuality not as a positive thing, like I'm going to go be a composer, but as a resistant, like I would prefer not to, like I'm not going to join with the times, and that's what makes me an individual. Like I'm not going to go with you into the van.
well, one thing about it is there's there is a sense of a relatively more sincere individual in both of the plays.
Mhm.
Of Stephen, I think Steve, whatever, in the birthday party and Berenger in this. But one thing about it is it's not exactly a positive ideal, either of them. They're more or less, as in there's nothing, you don't exactly, I mean, in a sense, like, yeah, you'd rather be Steve than Goldberg because Goldberg is a horrifying creature.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, you'd rather be Berenger than John, who's just a jackass.
Well, I mean, you'd rather be Berenger because he's not a rhino. I
Do
mean,
not judge another person's
don't judge the rhino.
That's okay. By the way, just on this insincere discourse or trying to like deal with the trauma of the rhinoceroses, I take Dotard, Dodard, yeah, Dudard, as like the way he's trying to be sympathetic and liberal and understanding and tolerant of others' choices to be a rhinoceros. That's another way of I don't know, having a scab over the open wound of this utterly unintelligible event. Um,
Yes. Yeah. I mean, exactly. I mean, it's on one hand, there was a time when it was like now we just have to live with COVID, but at the first point, it was like we just have to sacrifice our elders and just live with. And it was like, oh, okay, that seems crazy. That was one scab, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. The one I'm thinking of is like the problem of liberal politics. Like, so I'm very liberal, and so I want everyone at the table. But obviously, the one I want to not be at the table is the fascist. And there is a sense in this of like We have to live with the rhino. And it does critique that sense of open-mindedness. Because think about it, a lot of these people transform into rhinos in an act of open-mindedness.
Well, that's one thing that's interesting. I want to get back to the fascist angle in a minute because like there is a sense in which there's a real like sense of like if your neighbors were to start becoming Nazis, how do you react to this? How do you react to that in like the 1930s? How do you deal with the fact that that's what's on the radio now? That,
All the
like they're the ones.
the noise.
um, yeah. How do you deal with this? And Dodard is like, well, we have to be sympathetic. We have to understand where they're coming from, and it's like, I'm not comfortable. Um,
I'm not, and I think that there's a difference between, I think there's two types of understandings. I think like I can understand where different political positions come from, but that doesn't mean that I have to let them eat at my dinner table.
well, like
You know?
this was something that like I remember in 2016 going through a certain period of not denial, but just some kind of like, oh, the fact that Trump got elected, it isn't so bad. Like there are things about it that are like there are broader trends in American society this was leading to, and maybe this is like a natural outlet for that for the moment. Or I didn't believe that, but like I was hearing rhetoric about like that, and I was feeling like very much comforted by that.
I agree. I was exactly in the same place as you. This idea that it's almost like okay, yeah, there's ecological problems, there's huge issues, but if you look at these metrics, there's also all these really good things. And you're like, well, yeah, there are these really good things. But I was using it, and it sounds like you were as well, to say, oh, but no, this is just objectively really bad. Like you have to face that somehow. And that's still different from those metrics of positivity. Is that kind of where you're coming from?
Yeah, it's a similar way of like not wanting to face the good. My difference wasn't so much, oh, here's this good aspect of the Trump election. It was more or less like, well, this will let that part of American society express itself and feel heard, and then it won't be as big of a deal in another 4 years. And it's like, I remember hearing that argument. It was a little more sophisticatingly put, but it
Yeah.
was like, no, no, that's not what happened. There was no reason to think that would happen. That's
No,
not
the
how
only thing,
trends work.
no, it's not how trends work. What happened instead was just moral decay.
Yeah,
It's like, oh, apparently when we all talk like shit, we just slowly become shittier.
yeah. It's like, God, I wish we were still rhinoceroses. Um,
Yeah, but I
but
think I want to critique myself. The only reason I brought up anything related to COVID was because of the event aspect.
no,
A lot
I
of
think
it
that's a great
wasn't tragic,
reaction. Like there's
you
a
know.
certain sense of what is this world? Like this was a traumatic in the
Yeah.
Martinian sense and well, literal sense event of like what are our
Uh-huh.
lives now. This is a fundamental break in our norms and experience and everything. How do we process this?
Right. And
And it's
I processed it
unprocessable.
through a lot of Breath of the Wild. and and cheap beer, It was like, but still, I mean, it was, I was worried about
Yes,
my
the
family.
answer is drugs.
Is
uh,
drugs. For a time, I don't think that's too bad. But yeah, I mean, but still, there is this idea of one thing in the play I think that's good is that there isn't a position that's sort of fantasy where it's like the person who do really well without any need of anything and can just triumph over everything. Because like our main character doesn't become a rhino, but he's not doing well. It's not like he's, some paragon of male fortitude or something, you
yeah,
know?
he's to take a more popular kind of example. It's sort of like he's kind of like the Woody Allen character, where
Yeah.
the Woody Allen character is more sincere than like Alan Alda or something. Um, but you don't really want to be him. You don't.
No.
No one really wants to be Woody Allen. Um, you do what's wrong with it? Uh,
Wrong with being Woody Allen.
yeah, like that's not a pleasant kind of positioning to be. Um,
Right. And part of it is this is slightly different but similar in a sense of like Woody Allen's comedy style is so anxious that it makes me feel less anxious watching Woody Allen because I kind of live through like he gets to express this anxiety that I feel, I'm sure we all feel sometimes, and it's almost like he's a totem, like he gets to express that anxiety on my behalf and then I feel better because he puts it in a better way than I could ever do it. Um and but you don't want to have that much anxiety actually about social engagements
yeah,
or whatever
yeah.
it is.
No, I mean, it's capturing. Like I don't. Well, like Woody Allen's like he's capturing a real aspect of human life. I don't feel it's the most important aspect, or the most profoundly true, but it's like it's an important one, and that's to
Yeah, I
me
mean
like.
it's not. Yeah.
And there's a sense in which UNESCO with Rhinoceros, it's like yeah, like in a big way, a lot of what people tell themselves or a lot of the conventional attitudes, they're just a way of hiding the trauma of some unintelligibly bizarre event. Uh,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
like and like that's now I don't think that's fully true or the most fundamental point is and no I do think you can understand the world. I do think you can make sense of it. It's not just a pure bizarre malevolently funny event. Um, you
I
know,
mean,
I don't think that's what the universe is, but there's a sense in which yes, things happen. Like what was COVID? What was Trump? What was all these other things in our lives?
well,
How
looking
do we
backward,
process?
don't you think that there are people who rose more to the occasion?
Yeah, I do think there are people.
How do we live in a world where we don't think some people did better than others at
Yeah,
dealing with the event, right? Like, I mean, that's I'm gonna I don't need people to always keep their cool, but I do need the smart people who are in positions of power to act in the best practices. And so there are people during COVID where it was like, oh, they really took an ethical stance and they dealt with the event. Like Gretchen Whitmer in I mean, God, she was almost murdered by right-wing thugs. But like, there's certain governors that took their stances and they held on to it in different ways. And there was a gam the most the people that I think of as not maybe heroic's an outdated term, but maybe on that level during COVID were the ones who held on to some ethical position and didn't lose their head.
yeah. I I mean like there's to draw to I recently read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl,
Yeah.
and there's a sense in which like how do you confront the concentration camps? How do you confront this radically horrifyingly sick thing here? And basically what Frankel says is like, well, by having some sense of purpose, some belief in a value after this to keep striving for, some personal goal that keeps you attached to this world. And one thing that's really interesting that Frankel talks about is like you have among like prisoners this psychological phenomenon where they'll just wake up one morning and literally the person will not get out of bed. Nothing will cause them to get out of bed. They'll just sit there in the urine and their feces and they'll smoke their last cigarettes, and basically just curl up and die, because psychologically they don't feel any desire to act ever again, which is an understandable conclusion to draw when you're or state
Right.
to fall into in that situation. Um,
Well, I mean, that's oh man, I'm gonna sound like such a nihilist here, but like, that's the finding of religion in prison psychically can stave that off a little. I mean, that's a really negative way of thinking about it. But I mean, as
Well,
Botan
as in
says,
there, it's religion is like it's a lifeline, and like, well, but Frankel he points to things like, oh, the hope of like seeing your family again, or
yeah,
for him personally, like finishing his book,
yeah, or for a
which
prisoner who's actually innocent getting the truth out.
yeah,
Yeah.
there are
I mean,
positive
fuck, if you're just
outcomes.
guilty in prison, like fuck, I don't know. you know?
Yeah, now just it's a little bit weird comparing the world becoming rhinoceroses and the Holocaust in the same that's these are different things, but and they are because they are fundamentally different things, but there is a certain sense of how do you process either of these things? How do you
Right. And how do you
process
process when your neighbor suddenly slips from their usual discourse to bleeding rhinoceros sounds?
how do you process getting out of the trains and learning from other prisoners that that's human smoke coming out of those chimneys, and basically like the response of a lot of once they sort of realize that no, there's no particular hope in the near future of getting out of here. Frankel notes that there was a grim humor about it all. It was
Yeah.
funny to a lot of prisoners, like this utterly inhuman, nightmarish experience that they were going through. At least certain aspects of it. They
That's
found.
why Frankel's really this is similar to a point that Zizek makes, which is that like he hates the movie To Live, not the Kurosawa. That's great. But
Okay, I was
because the
concerned.
Kurosawa is like one of the greatest movies ever made. But there's the other
It's
one which
my
is
favorite movie.
yeah, like the concentration camps. And there's one called To Live. I don't I watched it in high school. It was fine. And it was some kernel of like through suffering the human spirit will endure. But Zizek's point is that like when you make serious movies about the Holocaust, it somehow obscures how horrible it is. Like even Schindler's List, which I think is also a great film, Zizek's point is that the only way to see how traumatic it was is to show that the comedy of it in the and I don't agree with him. I just think it's a great structural
Well,
point of like
I
things
think
are so bad that you can only do it through comedy.
no,
Yeah.
I think that's right. I'm not even going to qualify that statement actually, and I'm just going to say that that's correct. I there's a certain as in there's a certain realm of acceptable experiences that we have.
Yeah.
Like there's only sort of so much that we can process, and then it breaks beyond what we can process, just on an emotional psychological level. And that is, I mean, in a sense it's like no, you can't process these horrible things happening to you and all. Maybe you can process the death of a loved one, maybe you can process some sort of lose, I don't know, getting imprisoned unjustly. Like there are certain things you can do, but when it's this such a heinous satire of existence,
Yeah.
it's like no, it's not sad anymore. It's just funny because it's absurd. Nothing makes sense anymore. You've broken sense.
You broke exactly. And
By the way, I do want to say I don't know what I'm talking about. Like I don't know
oh, it
about
just feels true. I mean, I don't know. That was my
broke a
experience with the
law, but
rhinoceros is like
part of the reason I'm saying that is because that's what Frankel says, and he was there, so he was agreeing with that point in a big way. So just want to say, just want to put a big bit of skepticism on my own words
well,
there.
I mean, I think the first thing one of the first things I said about the play Rhinoceros is look, when we look to real world, I'll even say it more structurally. When we read these absurdist plays, what I think is fantastic about them is that their metaphorical usage is always going to extend beyond one thing. So like yeah, the rhinoceros kind of works as like the event of COVID in some ways, and in other ways it doesn't. And it also in some ways works towards the event of becoming an ideologue, whether that's a fascist or a communist, or I guess it really only goes those two ways. But I mean, it goes other ways. But in America, it goes a third way, which is these bonkers new age and right wing cults like QAnon, like QAnon, or the left wing one, Twin Flames Universe. It's like one day you're sitting there and you're like, wow, I'd really like to find my soulmate. And then in the cult, the Twin Flames Universe, it's like, oh yeah, this guy told me Barbara's my soulmate. So now we're married. And you're like,
Now,
sorry. So like the cult, the Twin Flames Universe, the premise of the cult is that you do have a soulmate and we will find them and like deliver them to you, which of course anyone with a mind for the superego realizes that flips into a this man is your soulmate and now you're in an abusive relationship with a schizophrenic. That was one of the cases, is they literally just paired this girl with a mentally ill man and was like, here you go. And it's, I mean, the most heinous thing they did was they told you your real gender, which, God, I couldn't think of that. I mean, and so it's like you go in as a man and it's like, well, actually, you're the eternal feminine. And so they forced them to have sex changes.
yeah, that's.
Basically the
Yeah, I'm
opposite
not.
of progress.
I'm not going to process that.
No, no, no. And we don't have to, but the point is that, like, in addition to Marxism and the fascist like way the brain gets into this sort of group think place, in America, we do have our strange religions.
I mean, one thing I want to like also put it there of in terms of the rhinoceroses around
Yeah.
us is like this is something that occurred to me when I was like in DC and it was like nighttime and I'm walking by the Capitol. And I'm not like I don't think the Capitol is like an amazing building architecturally exactly, but it's impressive. It was impressive.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like, God, I wish I could respect the people that worked there. And it's like, isn't that just horrifying to like just feel like, yeah, I don't actually have respect for the people that run the country. I don't feel they're very good at their jobs. I don't feel they're smart. I feel they're deeply incompetent in many ways. And
They're
you're
too
more
dark.
competent than let's say uh, I don't know, a big chunk of American society. I'm not saying the majority, but a big chunk. I'll
Yeah.
give them that credit at least. But it's like it's a shame. It's a shame that like you can't look up to that. Like in a sense, like this is just a reality we live in. The people who run our government are just really not that smart a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember being like, oh, thank God it's Biden. And then I went, thank God it's Biden. God, we could do better.
Yeah, like
But my brain,
exactly.
like, he's really,
Oh man,
fuck.
just senility.
I mean,
um,
we were all, everyone who wasn't a Trumper, and I'm not saying that's, I think that's centrist and left wing and middle right. Like a lot of people, just anyone who wasn't in that camp, a lot of people went, thank God Biden, because, it's just like a man. And like, I'm not, because the people who are voting for him would never be cult followers.
yeah, it was a
Don't have
return.
that danger at all. Like, no one's going to follow
It
this
was a
man off.
return to sanity, not a return to competence by any means. But
Right. I mean, but I think that I think we can do better. And I think that we can treat that in a sense of reaching for more authentic discourse, in the sense that if our government is a lot of botards and doodards right now, which I just saw that name, by the way.
Dard, I like Dard a lot. Like relatively speaking, he's
Oh
someone
my,
who, like he's the most sympathetic character outside of like Berenger, for me. Um, he's the one
right.
who resembles a human being the most.
Oh, I mean, getting back to the rhinoceros, I think our rant is well taken and relevant to the play about the government.
It is. It is like it's just like it's like the fact. But my point is like the fact that we're okay with like yeah, the competitions are really not politicians are really just not that smart. Those are rhinoceroses that we just accept. Like we go on with our lives and like, yeah, it's not that good, whatever. I mean, same thing with like I don't know the public school system. Nobody thinks the public school system is good. Everybody knows it's failing in fundamental and major ways, and we just live with this fact. Maybe some people try to do something about it, but it's like again another like fundamental absurdity in our
Yeah, it
lives.
was like I saw a thing and isn't it, it's like 60% of Americans are at like, what is it, a fifth grader reading level?
Yeah,
You
and
know,
then there's
some
like
awful statistic where it's like, well, that just makes me sad and I don't have anything to do with it now.
yeah, and it's like, and then there's like 15 or 20% of Americans are functionally illiterate, so like they can read "the cat is red," but they can't work through like a legal document in any meaningful way.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and then it's like, a lot of people critique the legal system in ways that are good, don't get me wrong. But there's also this aspect of like the legal system is not designed for a person with a fifth grade reading level. You're gonna get you're gonna get trapped. And it's fine. I mean, it's not fine, but I think that like I don't know, I really want to say one of my favorite quotes. So I can't, there's no transition I can make to say this
go
quote
for
that
it,
has
go
anything
for
to
it.
do with what we're talking about. But Botard goes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. The fact that I despise religion doesn't mean I don't esteem it highly. And that's like, trying to get, that's like a bootlicking sentiment, but it's also just,
It's so
how do you do
perfect
it?
coming from Butard because he's just so. I mean, he's the most odious character in the play in my mind. Like John is bad, but Butard is like next level for me because of he just has that smart alecky. I'm better than all you sheeple. I'm in on this secret and just willing to confabulate constantly of like
Oh, well, here, wait, the willing to confabulate. The best part right at the beginning, it's like they're talking about the color of like a damn cat. And it's feminine or masculine or whatever. And it doesn't matter at all. It's not important. And then Botard is like, they're talking, suddenly it gets onto the color bar, which is like somehow now related to racism. And you're like,
uh,
what? And then he goes, it's not an issue to be dismissed lightly, Mr. Dudard. The course of history has shown that racial prejudice. And then Dudard's like, I
it's
tell
a
you, it doesn't
cat.
end up to it. It's like
It's a
not
cat.
relevant.
Oh my god, that was just amazing.
It was
Um,
great. And it was
I just like how like straight faced the whole play is. Um, just it's just wonderful. Um, just how dry all of that humor
wait,
is.
that didn't end. Papillon, the color bar is not the issue at stake. Botard is like, nevertheless, one should never miss an occasion to denounce it. And you're like, it reminds me, I mean, there's so much theory that's like, this is actually kind of a funny issue. In the 90s, in philosophy and feminism and critical theory, there's this sort of the parade of the people where it's like this experience of, and I'm going to make it completely non sympathetic, the experience of washing our hands may not be the same for a woman of color. Not to mention a non-binary person, or if you think about it, an immigrant washing their hands. It's very, and then they just go through every identity, and you're like, there's a little bit of like, well, wait a minute, but that's not relevant. And now we don't really do that in theory anymore. But there was a period where you read an article and it's like, well, yeah, but like, I mean, I mean, sure, but why are you talking about it?
Yeah, it's just this kind of. I mean, for Botard, like his whole attitude is one of like wanting to be superior than the average bear. Like that's he as in he's weaponizing the color bar, for that end.
Yeah, he
Uh,
doesn't really care about any issue, racism or religion or whatever it is. He wants to, it's just about how he positions himself. He needs to position himself in a certain way on every issue.
like he can't he's been denying the eyewitness testimony of there's a rhinoceros out there, And then as soon as like they actually do see a rhinoceros, one of their coworkers turns out to be a rhinoceros. Um, he says he's never denied it from the beginning. He was only wanting to cast a certain amount of doubt before I fully accepted it, or something like that. It was just odious.
Well, and
Um,
it's the type of I think that I don't think you need an education to see that type of rhetoric. I think among blue collar workers or other people, I think it's just a type of person that exists everywhere where you just like, oh yeah, they do this thing, and you can tell it's because they're super pushy about their position, and it's it's just very relatable. I mean, I've just known
it's
people
extraordinarily
like
relatable. Like the character of Botard is to me like the most familiar characterization of the play.
Mhm.
He's the one who's like, yeah, I know that guy. Yeah, yeah. Um,
Oh, have you ever seen that movie, John? Oh, I've seen it. It's my favorite movie. I've seen it like 20 times. Well, John, I made up that movie, you asshole. Think for it's literally a Rick and Morty quote where it's like he's like talking to Summer and Morty, and he goes, do you guys like the blah blah blah? And they go, oh, we love the blah blah blah. And he goes, oh yeah, you like the blah blah blah? Well, I made up the blah blah blah. So fuck you. Think for yourselves. It's just, I mean, Rick is obviously not. It's a he's not the sympathetic character all the time, but in that moment, obviously, there's this like
yeah,
that they were there in the position of Bowtie. Yeah, it just very, yeah, it's there. So I've looked up. I think that do you think that there's some similarities? This is going to sound so weird, just on a different tangent, between this play and 1984.
I mean,
I mean,
and
in a weird sense, I actually enjoyed reading this more than reading 1984.
I
But
mean, I'm
1984 is
gonna.
this big document, of course.
I mean, 1980. I mean, I'm gonna say fundamentally no. Um,
Okay,
in the sense that 1984 takes itself very seriously and deservedly. I think it's I don't think it's like, oh, this is like the fifth greatest book ever written, like a lot of people do. But I think it's an excellent book. People should know about it. Like it belongs in the high school curriculum, arguably. It's very approachable. Um, uh, but I'm trying to, but it's like it's okay. So it takes itself very seriously. It's about the horror of totalitarianism. Um, and well, it's a political book. Um, it's not really about any deeper issue. Maybe um, there's sub themes about the dignity of man and of knowledge and the pursuit of that, but that's not the level this play is working. This is a metaphysical play. Um,
it also is more like I guess like the similarities are, of course, the one man trying to break out of the system, um, and the qualities of the man in 1984 are sort of fine. you know,
yeah. Well,
like
when
and Berenger's like fine. It's not like there's anything about Berenger other than I think the one thing that crosses over is that so much of subjectivity is thought of as negative. Like I'm myself because I am not going on that march. Um, I
yeah,
think that's one overlay. The problem is with my argument is it totally falls apart in the fact that he has the affair and does all these positive things. Like it's not, it doesn't actually line up. Whereas in the Ionesco, it does more.
yeah. Winston, in 1984, he is he's minimally efficacious. Like basically almost everything he does is like planned out by his girlfriend, or he's sort of pulled along by O'Brien. The only sort of act he does is tripping a bureaucrat once. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
or,
yeah.
which was a significant act, but it's not exactly that much. But no, he has the dignity of wanting to know, wanting to hold on to his self, wanting to do something to change the world around him. Berenger is he's a nice but aimless drunk. Like he's his problem is what you say is like Winston is he's fine in the world. He's fine with the world as a world.
Yeah,
It's just the political system that's made life unlivable. Berenger, it's like no, he's just an outsider to this whole thing called society. Like Winston would just he'd be a fine, earnest middle manager type. He'd probably like some like Papillon and Dutard. Um, at least in Ionesco's
yeah.
evaluation. Um,
No,
so so I'd
I
say
think I think
they're
you're right. Those
fundamentally
are
different attitudes.
different attitudes, and I think those are really specific, good pieces of evidence. I think the most important, I think a more important thing in Ionesco is the rhetoric of groupthink, like, or just the way you lose your voice. I mean, just becoming rhinoceros, and that's that's more important. It reminds me. So there's this great novelist by there's the named Giffey, Gefei, who's a Chinese novelist who did a retelling of the old myth, Chinese myth, Peach Blossom Spring. And in it, it's mainly about this woman who is like brutalized right before communism and everything. And she joins the revolutionary fervor. But in the book, it's not like, oh, yay, we now have communism. It's like thought of as like a fever. Like, oh, you caught the fever. And I think that's more where the on Ionesco's level of, oh, this is like a fever that you catch or a disease or something
Well,
that
it's
makes you
yeah,
lose your
like
word.
Berenger talks about it that way, and there is a degree of that. But I like one thing that's interesting is how like what precedes the transformation for each person that we meet.
Yeah.
For John, the thing that sort of precedes it is this argument he has with Berenger, where Berenger says, "You're just a pompous ass who doesn't know what you're talking about," and embarrasses him in a kind of more or less straightforward way. Like this hurts and that damages John's self-esteem. With uh, Papillon, it's just he's just sort of what they mention. Is what Berenger mentions is that Daisy had said he had horny hands, just in rough. Um,
Yeah.
and well, presumably in some other capacity too. I think there's a subtext in that context of
Double entendre.
with Papillon,
Right.
but he's he's basically him being discarded that way by Daisy. The that and that's what with Dudard. When he changes, it's similar. He's in love with Daisy, but Daisy's in love with Berenger, and that realization is what pushes him over the edge to become a rhinoceros. It's all of these individual sort of shocking, traumatic events, you might say. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Trauma to their self-esteem, to their values, that sort of thing, that precedes becoming a rhinoceros. Um, and I feel like it's. I mean, I feel like becoming a rhinoceros really is just yes, we are not thinking anymore. We are rhinoceri. And
I mean,
there's
it has to be, right? Because otherwise, it wouldn't be so damn funny when they're like, we respect the values of the rhinoceros. Like if they were actually a legit category, well, I mean, that would be a
they're
terrible
so
thing.
beautiful.
Yeah,
God,
like,
this song, it's just so. It might be a bit rough, but it has a real.
and I think that like that's Ionesco's
Like
value.
them dancing. Um,
So he's an absurdist in a sense, but he's making a very, in a sense, traditional individualistic argument. Like I think this play, I read this play as, don't let them tell you what to do, how to retain your autonomy. Like I don't, I mean, and all the absurd things are sort of normal in that other way where it's like, yeah, I mean, we've all seen the experience of someone losing their discourse or and read about it, and it's
Yeah,
it's
it's
kind of
what it reminds me of is Thomas Mann has a big part of his attitude is there's the sort of aesthete intellectuals detached from this world who are sort of plagued by a sense of meaninglessness in their aesthetic vacuum. And then there's the sort of the healthy man on the street, unintellectual, and when we say unsullied by intellectuality, who retains that sort of uh, beastly earthiness that's very alluring to other characters. Like this occurs in the Magic Mountain and in a
uh-huh.
shorter work of Tonio Berger, I think it was called. I probably getting the name wrong.
Or to quote Blazing Saddles, these are salt of the earth, blue collar workers, morons.
And well, it is notable. I believe Thomas Mann did join the Nazi Party eventually. So
he had that allure more than I do. I mean, I find that a silly position in a sense. Like I don't.
I think there's a
I mean, it's fine. It's common. It's an anxiety I've seen in other academics. I just have never ever related to that in a serious way.
yeah. I think when your dichotomy on some level mentally is, do I want to be like the nice waitress who I met, or the person checking me out at the grocery store? Would I rather be like that or like Sartre? Um, there's a sense of please the former. I do not want to be that creature, Sartre. Um,
Norm, I'd like to have untorturous sex.
yeah,
It's like we all. It's funny that Sartre's positioned as this like sexual guy. First of all, because he was like famously ugly, but the second thing is of course that you get from his writings. It's like, oh no, this guy's kind of scared of sex. This is not like a fun thing for this guy. But yeah, I mean, I think there is that aspect of that, but also that's kind of an antagonism that Sartre had himself, right? Like like part of the workers unions and like the left-wing movements is like is part of that. And he also never worked at an academy. He got his PhD or whatever that it is, but he and he lectured, but he thought of himself as trying to be part of the culture more. I don't
yeah.
I don't think
Um,
he did
yeah,
that.
I don't know enough. I'm just saying that he's to me the the symbol of the neurotic intellectual. He's everything wrong with being an intellectual. Well, let's say an interesting intellectual, as in not a pseudo intellectual. That's a different problem. But like an
Oh, yeah,
intellectual.
no, like he's a real guy. It's just
Yeah,
it's
like like,
just
like
like we
there's
don't want to beat
I
him.
like reading Sartre. I enjoy
Right.
it, but I would hate to be this creature. Um, he's
It's a very
repellent.
yeah, he's to quote the philosopher Todd McGowan, there's a moment between being a nothingness and the critique of dialectical reason where he becomes very paranoid through the Marxist ways. It's he loses his friends. I'm just saying it wouldn't be fun to be Sartre.
Yeah.
And you can read one story of him and know that. It's not a man you want
I
to be.
and my only point with it all is like there's a reason why Thomas Mann would see this dichotomy, and there's a reason why, and that's an interesting this aspect of we sort of have that phenomenon with Rhinoceros is well the rhinoceros I have a point. The rhinoceros running along with their beautiful horns. God.
Dustling, the green, that the beautiful dull green, and you're like, yeah, like an
Oh
ugly
God!
color.
I mean, my my chest, this weak, soft chest. If only for gray and hard, something you could really parade in public.
There is an aspect of like, if an alien species was able to get under the wavelength of our language, they would be like that. That's why humans are weird. This is not normal. Not the play, but the fact that that's, yeah, like it's weird what you want. So I think by the way, on that position, I mean, it doesn't really matter what my position is right now, but I think if I was forced to say like, how do I feel about that, like salt of the earth versus intellectual upperclassness, I think my response is going to be about know-how, that like, well, when you're in a certain situation, there's a certain know-how that the waitress is going to have that the intellectual doesn't have, and there's a certain view of intelligence that's gaining know-how in more circumstances. So being able to talk with the waitress and also being able to write a grant, it's, and I think that that would be more my, and that's a really boring way of thinking about it, but
Well,
that's kind of how I carry myself. Is there's different situations that have different facts, and you can get onto the wavelength of those using your intellect.
yeah, what I would say about it is, there is a one second. It's a false dichotomy ultimately
Yeah.
of like you can be an intellectual and well-adjusted and functioning in society, like someone like Aristotle or Descartes or I know so many scientists like
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a party scene of like
it's
all
like
of
yeah,
the,
they're just like yeah, you can be dealing with some of the greatest, most profound ideas. You can be a
yeah.
very serious intellectual and not a freak.
Well,
And
there's a movie where it sums this up perfectly. I forget, but it has Jonah Hill's younger sister, who's also a great actress, which is kind of funny. And they're only studying to get into Harvard. And they don't do any fun. They don't do any parties. They don't do any sports. They don't do anything with friends. They're just studying for college. And they overhear kids talking in the bathroom, and they thought were the dumb jocks, but they're talking like, "Oh, I got my Brown acceptance letter. I got my Harvard acceptance letter. Oh, this is going to be great." And they come to this horrifying revelation. Oh my God, they did both. They did both. Yeah, they did both. They didn't, it's this false dichotomy. I mean, I think I would actually argue in a certain sense that most academics I know, while often introverted, are going to be more sensitive to social arrangements and treat that as a form of knowledge than people who've only lived in Utah and haven't gone outside of their own social arrangements. I think I would actually, I would, in the language of the youth, stand the intellectual in
yeah,
general.
yeah. So I'm just putting
That's
it.
because I got a PhD. Sorry, I'm going to stand it that way.
Yeah, we both.
I
Yeah,
hate that phrase, but I
like
had to.
we're. I mean,
Yeah.
what the fuck is more intellectual than two guys podcasting about fucking Ionesco's
Modernism.
Rhinoceros? Like, what is this? Like a math PhD and a music PhD doing this? This is a satire. Uh,
Right, and if we all just agreed that we had to stay in our own lanes, then that aspect of no all falls away. And it's like, no, I can get a knowledge of literature.
oh,
Fuck you, I can do it.
another thing, by the way, I just want to mention,
Yeah,
changing, doing the point you were bringing up, of like you keep calling it a, it's almost like it's a road guide to maintaining your individuality on some level.
yeah,
Um, Display and the Pinter, and I guess the Beckett too. Um, I won't quite. I would say it deals with the relationship of individuality and sort of insincere, bad faith discourse. Like there's a relationship there, but it doesn't strike me as normative, as instructions in any meaningful way. Of Behringer is like, yeah, he happens to have the individuality sickness, we'd almost want to say. He's not really doing anything to maintain that. It just almost strikes me more as like, well, yeah, that's just characterologically what's in him. And
Yeah, like you could think about the positioning of alcohol as antisocial that prevents the rhinoceros, which is not very heroic about his subjectivity. It's just like a place he finds himself.
yeah, as in there's a little bit in the sense of, I mean, you could argue there are moments where he's particularly honest in a way that maybe other characters aren't, but he's not that honest in a certain level. Like there are also times where he's like all the time he's spending romanticizing Botard, and
Yeah.
because like Botard was like not a rhinoceros or something along that lines, and then he's so shocked when it turns out that he was, or the way he acts with um Daisy at the end is rather unflattering. He's a weak person after all. Um,
Oh
and
yeah, it's really it's kind of random, but
yeah,
yeah.
and it's also just notable, just the last speech he has in the play that you mentioned earlier. Um, is he's basically getting to the point of just fetishizing the rhinoceros, getting lubricious over their song, and he's just to quote it, he looks in the mirror. I'm so ugly. People who try to hang on to their individuality always come to a bad end. He suddenly snaps out of it. Oh well, too bad. I'll take on the whole of them. I'll put up a fight against the lot of them, the whole lot of them. I'm the last man left, and I'm staying that way until the end. I'm not capitulating. And there's a part of me that, like, in a sense, he was allured by the rhinoceroses and all of that. He's belittling individuality and he snaps out of it. But I don't know, like snapping out of like for what? For what? Like I
Man, you're talking so close to transitioning. You're the words you're using. I think this is kind of the brilliance of the play is like, well, yeah, like he's not that great. But the language you're using right now is like the moment before Raymond Shram becomes a rhinoceros. Like, yeah, like, but what's my life? Like, it's not that great. Like,
well,
I could run outside and eat with the trees.
yeah, God, I think my face is just so flat. I could just use one or many horns on it.
you'd be like, you'd be like, with using arithmetic, there's so much more of us.
Yeah, like I just want to be somebody who's got all 4 feet on the ground. Um,
Firmly planted among the earth.
landed on the ground.
No, no,
Um,
but I mean, the point wasn't to make anyone self-conscious or anything. The point is that there is sort of a weird flip and stuck into the play, which is that as soon as you start arguing about, like Berenger's slovenliness, there's a weird implication that you're at the stage before turning into a rhinoceros.
yeah,
And I think that's
I
really brilliant in the play.
yeah, like it's I guess my point is like, what's I almost want to make the point like, what's so great about individuality? Like in the context of the play. No, in reality, yes, there are obvious values. There are obvious values. Like I don't, you
I
know,
think there's a horn starting to come.
in
Sorry,
the
I'll stop harping
context
on
of
this
the
point. I'm just
play.
very happy. I think I discovered a point about this play is that as soon as you start arguing what's so great about Berenger, it's that's structurally the transitional moment. Because
Yeah,
you're right, there isn't really anything great about Berenger. It's factually correct. It's just that in the language of the play, that's the sort of language that people start using right before they become rhinos, which is brilliant. I mean, that's fucking brilliant, right? Like the way it's kind of baked in a sense to the structure
yeah,
of the.
yeah. Well, let's see the phrase that each of them, which is always a rationalization. that
Right.
each of the characters uses beforehand is John is saying, well, wouldn't it be better if we got rid of all this civilization and culture? When earlier he'd been telling John, like, oh, you should go and become cultured. There's a new play by Ionesco out. You should go see that. Which is
I was like, thanks.
um, but and Botard is like, we have to move along with the times, and Papillon, I don't know what I think he's just saying I'm just retiring, but there's no explicit reason given on his part. Uh,
Yeah.
Dutard is I want to stand with my people. You know, I don't want to abandon them. All real change comes from within. Um,
That was my favorite because, like, I mean, sometimes, but not
I mean,
always.
well, the greatest joke is everybody who criticizes ISIS should stop because all real change comes from within. Uh,
Yeah, like an imminent ISIS critique. You'd be immediately on the terrorist list, like you publish in your thing, an imminent critique of Al Qaeda.
yeah. Um,
We
yeah,
should. Well, I mean, you actually that's funny, but you do get it. And when you do get the imminent critiques, they just sound like absolute absurdity. Like I don't think we should behead the people. I think a regular murder is fine. You're like, what? It's like that would be an imminent critique of ISIS. Is we want
yeah.
to not defile the corpse. We'll just let
What?
them die.
No child should be forced to marry below the age of 9.
And it
You
used to be 8. God damn it, 8. We've given them one more year.
know?
That's awful.
Yeah, this
But
is,
true. I mean, that's the imminent critique. Is um. Well, I mean, the funnier joke, of course, is that how does a rhino make an imminent critique?
yeah,
Of
it's like we'd rather, and it's just like it's so bizarre. I mean, what's interesting to contrast this with the Pinter is both of them have this air of menace about them.
Yeah,
This air of some external force that's threatening you, that's surrounding you, that's suffocating you, it's inescapable. Um, with Pinner, it felt more pointed in a certain way, while here it feels just fatter, more complacent. It feels like McGree, where it's funny, but it's really malicious. You
yeah.
know?
Instagram models, like
Yeah,
so much of our online activity these days fits within more of the Ionesco. The airbrushed, mainly women who look all the same. They all look the same.
yeah,
There's
or
there's
or
no individuality in that look at all.
yeah, or let's see. I don't even know where if this fits. I'm just gonna throw it out there. It was a release by the Chinese Communist Party where they said what was it? It was explaining certain aspects of like the new restrictive law that in Hong Kong, when Hong
Yeah,
Kong was losing its liberty back in 2019, and well, now it's totally lost.
yeah,
But it was like it was done though of a young woman in her like college dorm room explaining these things in that jump cut fashion, and it was scary
that's fucked up.
because it's just like it's it's formal legal threats and encroaching totalitarianism in that in that presented in this totally insincere just normal aspect of like but meant to be sincere way of like doing a YouTube video. um Frankly, I just hate it like when I seen YouTube advertisements and it's like, no, this is obviously like a very well put together operation that has the money for marketing, but they're presenting it as like, hey guys, I'm just walking around in my backyard, doing that like that just eats at me in a way that's like
I
so.
know it's like my favorite commercials these days are the ones that just sell me a damn product, right? You know, the car commercials where they're in a fantastic environment that's not real and it's obviously not real. It could be Zelda, right? And it says at the bottom, like, don't try this at home. That's what I'm here for. Like, that's great. You know, sell me the Subaru Outback that's flying in space.
Yeah, that would actually be like amazing if they just really like they just had like you're like I don't know like Hummer driving through like Rainbow Road or whatever.
They're kind of like that. If you look at some of the ones, you look and you realize they could be, I don't think they are, but they're inseparable from an AI generated landscape. It's just computer generated, and so the distance isn't that far. The point is that, like, when you have an advertisement that just sells you a thing, or a government PSA that just tells you a thing to do, there is less ideological work than when it sells you something in the, or you know, when it's doing that sort of, as you said, the camera angle where it's trying to position itself as non-totalitarian. And it's completely different from an advertisement because the government is telling you the law. You know, this is not just some girl saying, oh, we can't go to the bus after 9 p.m. It's not because of any riots, because there are no riots in China. We don't have those.
Yeah.
You know, it's terrifying.
Yeah, yeah, it's I mean, this is like what's interesting, just this whole note of insincerity, and like you see that a lot in advertisements of that degree of the insincerity. And what's
Well, it's
interesting
more
about
in advertisements when they sell a lifestyle than when they just sell you a burger.
yeah, as in I don't know, just telling me, hey, you know, breakfast all day at Burger at McDonald's. It's like thanks,
Cool.
thanks, I'm on board. Um,
Yeah. Or like
muffin.
yeah, but like instead when it's like you're in a hammock and there's a beautiful woman with you and you're at a lake in Michigan and then it's like you're here because of some convoluted ridiculousness and then it's selling you perfume and you're like, "Wait, but how did we even get here?"
I mean, like one part of like the advertising philosophy I've heard one school of it at least
Yeah.
is it's meant to like make you feel better about your purchase, as in like you see like you know the Subaru doing something like outrageous and cool, and it feels like yeah, I bought that car, I feel good about that purchase.
Of
um
course.
and it's has this like propagandistic quality in that sense of it's not trying to convince you, it's trying to rationalize you. um
Yes.
and but again directly back to the rhinoceros.
Yeah.
Rhinoceros. um it's just interesting how these characters have that advertisement voice in a
Yeah.
fundamental way of like it's not really them talking. Like Berenger is the only one who really talks. By the way, what did you think of Daisy as a character? I didn't really fully understand her being.
I thought she was slightly more enigmatic and I liked that. I liked also that she was like the second last to go. And I think that kind of fits because on a first read, I didn't get a good read on her. I'd have to do it on a second read,
Yeah,
obviously.
I mean this is my second read, and at least now I understand that I don't understand her. I just don't really understand the discourse that she's representing
Yeah.
there. Like I understand everyone else's discourse.
Yeah.
So
Well,
anyway,
I think that was I think I said everything I wanted to say, but I do want to do our traditional what is traumatic about this play.
yeah.
Um, the event. How do we come with the event? You know, how do you? And there were moments where there were types of language used that I went, "Oh, I've seen this in my life as a stitching over of the real." And you know, I go back and forth. Sometimes I say it's ethically bad when we use our inauthentic language, and other times I'm more forgiving and I think, well, I mean, it's the real, it's a void, so I don't know how the exact way to authentically deal with it, and I go back and forth on all of that. But yeah, it's the event, you know, the event of the interruption there,
Yeah,
eruption.
yeah, that's basically the trauma for me too is well, basically, I was trauma by the trauma. Um, as in it captures what it's like when there's this big unintelligible event in life that you can't really co-opt into your standard categories, and here's these different attempts to do so that all fail, and it's something to look out for. It made me aware of this issue much more than I had ever thought of before. um,
Yeah.
so I was really, it was an elaboration in that sense on like the character of Goldberg. um I guess you could say like with the Pinter, the character of Goldberg is just, here's a really toxic way of being in the world. um
Yeah.
and here's Ionesco saying, yes, that's being in the world, almost, or something like that's just, here's all variations on that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so this was fun, Chris. We are tentatively planning on doing some Mammoth next week. Um,
Who's still alive?
yeah, yeah, he's still alive, which is
Our one of our more one
weird.
of our first living writers.
Yeah, yeah. God, values aren't dead. Um,
And now I work at a bookstore where I get only living writers. I get all the IRCs for free. Mwahaha. I don't know
all
why I'm
right,
pet plugging that. But anyway, yes, we'll do some Mammoth. Very excited.
all right. So see you then, Chris.
Bye.
Bye.